Migrants are in ICE custody this morning after a raid where police discovered illegal guns and drugs in the house where they were squatting. All of this happening just steps away from an elementary school. By the way, this is not the first time
That is unbelievable, and experts say it's only the beginning of a much larger, growing problem.
Surveillance video shows the moment 4 NYPD officers are seen running in the direction of a multifamily home.
They were responding to a call about a man with a gun. They chased one man into the basement.
Authorities say they were part of a heavily armed group of migrants allegedly selling drugs after taking over this multi-family house.
The problem is that there were squatters. There were a lot of people, a lot of young people, a lot of motorcycles. They were a nuisance in the neighborhood.
The suspect who prompted that 911 call that set all of this off, it's this guy on your screen. He was accused of shooting a man last year.
The 8 suspects face gun, drug, and child endangerment charges. All but 2 of them were released without bail.
If you don't know that the state of New York's justice system has collapsed, you don't want to know.
Police say this is one part of one migrant gang, and there are others.
So squatting is the latest trend to take off in America. But what nobody's talking about is this recent squatting gang-related bust, and all of the other incidents taking place here in New York are actually the fault of the city's laws that protect squatters and release armed criminals without bail, which encourages them to recommit the same offenses they were never punished for in the first place. On top of that, the judge who released these particular gang members has a history of releasing thugs who attack police. And the uncomfortable truth this reveals is that New York is no longer a sanctuary city just for immigrants. It is now also a sanctuary city for dangerous, violent criminals, with gangs openly recruiting new members among the city's shelter populations for the purposes of riding around on mopeds and stealing phones and wallets from unsuspecting New Yorkers as they walk down the street. But that's not enough. Now homes and apartments are being stolen by gang members as well, all while the city of New York covers for them and protects them. On top of that, nobody's talking about how this squatting crisis is making the city's asylum crisis much worse in ways our leaders never anticipated. Because the city's now evicting asylum seekers from its shelters, telling them to leave facilities like this and just go out on the open market and find apartments. But with all this news of squatters, very few landlords are willing to take chances giving leases to people with no work authorization and no credit scores, making things tougher for people who abide by the law. On top of that, critics say that if one gang of drug dealers was caught squatting in one apartment, chances are there are others all over the city. So here we have some of your typical overpriced tiny New York City apartments, all of which could be claimed by squatters if they could just figure out a way inside, and then claim without any proof that they've been living there for 30 days.
8 migrants under arrest and now facing charges after police responded to a call here on Hull Avenue last week. The police found guns, drugs, and a child inside the basement of this home right across from a school, a home the migrants were living in as squatters.
So these squatters, they probably could have continued squatting in that apartment had they not been committing other crimes involving drugs and firearms. And that's because in this city, squatters have rights. Once they're inside a place, there's not much owners can do to get rid of them, even if they're there illegally. In fact, last month, a homeowner was arrested when the man she found inside her house claimed he'd been living there even with no lease or no bills. But the police still arrested the homeowner when she changed the locks on him. And criminals aren't stupid. They learn from each other fast. And now that they know finders keepers is how New York City real estate works, all they've got to do is find a place and move in. And that's why these squatting horror stories keep popping up. But apparently these people were squatting inside their stolen apartment for a very long time. And what exactly was it that they did that attracted police to their presence?
This surveillance video obtained by Eyewitness News shows police moving in. They were responding to a call about a man with a gun. They chased one man into the basement. He's identified as 24-year-old Hector de Souza Villalta, believed to be a migrant from Venezuela.
So as it turns out, squatting wasn't the reason they had to go. And apparently the thing that tipped police off to their presence was that they were in the street waving around firearms. And there are people who say we shouldn't punish minor crime because doing so doesn't stop higher levels of crime. But here we have people that have been squatting in an apartment for quite some time, and they felt so emboldened by it, critics say that they were now brandishing guns in the middle of the street. If this was your apartment and you saw something like that going on, you would definitely alert the authorities. And when the police got that call, they had no choice but to move in. And I'm not sure what's scarier, the fact that 8 people were arrested only after they'd taken things to the highest level possible, or what happened after they were placed in handcuffs.
4 of 8 suspects arrested can be seen here with police walking them out. They are facing weapons, drugs, and child endangerment charges because police say there was a 7-year-old child staying with them.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but to me it's pretty frightening that people can commit a crime or crimes of that level and endanger a child and they still get released. After stealing someone's home, these laws make zero sense. Unless it's your goal to create a sanctuary city for criminals. And the sad truth about all of this is it's not the first time drug dealers in New York have endangered the lives of others, including a child. No, it's just the latest time that it's happened. Because even though the people in this story were masquerading as law-abiding asylum seekers, criminals in this city have had get-out-of-jail-free cards for a long time. But to truly understand how bad this story's about to get and how it's exasperating New York's already existent asylum crisis, look at what police were able to find inside the squatted house and think to yourself that if you're a landlord and you're trying to rent to people in a city of squatters, how much harder it now is to take a chance renting to folks who just got here and may not have a job at Goldman Sachs.
Police say they recovered 2 more loaded guns and ammunition, as well as drugs. A neighbor tells us the landlord has been struggling with squatters.
You didn't know who was staying there or not staying there. You know, the owner of the building had a hell of a time trying to get them out.
So not only was this house of horrors a crime base, the owner was aware that squatters were living inside of it, but because the city protects those squatters, there was absolutely nothing here the police could do about it. And the fact that squatters can basically live wherever they want, that gave these criminals a place for their base of operations, which would not have been possible without New York City's squatters' rights. And what this means is that by protecting criminals, we give them the ability to commit types of crime that would be impossible otherwise.
Alfred Munoz believes the group was living next door to him for 6 months or possibly even longer.
There were a lot of people, a lot of young people, a lot of motorcycles.
The alleged squatters were bused.
6 months. They were in there for 6 whole months. And the neighbor remarked that there were untold numbers of people coming in and out of that place. And they say the front of the building was infested with motorbikes. Now, to many people, squatting in an apartment for 6 months might sound outrageous. But in New York, the only way to evict squatters is to take them to housing court. And the courts are so backed up, there might be a 6 to 8 month wait just to see a judge. And for a small-time homeowner to navigate this, possibly for the first time, it's no wonder those thugs thought they had a place to live forever. And this is where things get really tricky for New York City's asylum seekers. After 30 days, single adults have to leave. After 60 days, families have to leave. They cannot reapply for shelter right now. And who is going to rent to them? They're not leaving with $4,000 a month housing vouchers either. If you're a landlord and someone moves in and stops paying, even if they're from America, in this city, you'll never get that rent. And by protecting squatters, New York City is now hurting its vulnerable asylum seekers. And what's even more terrifying is that New York has a right to counsel law, which means that if you're being evicted, you can get free legal assistance. And since people get evicted for not paying rent, this is a law that provides lawyers to squatters. And it's all free, but believe it or not, our story gets even worse because one of the people inside that apartment that was caught, they did something much worse than anything we've talked about.
NYPD officers are seen running in the direction of a multifamily home and coming back into frame with several people in handcuffs.
2 of the people with the guns had open cases. One for attempted murder in Yonkers and one...
Now we get to the point in this story where things become truly frightening because once you find out who these people were, you're going to be absolutely shocked. But at first, when I heard about 8 people squatting in an apartment, I wondered if these were people who'd been displaced from shelters and had nowhere else to go. But as it turns out, these were not well-meaning people suffering from homelessness. Oh no, these people were the worst of the worst. They had long prior rap sheets that had recently been built. And if it weren't for a totally different independent branch of law enforcement, we'd never know how bad these guys really were.
We know 7 of the 8 people arrested during last week's raid are now in immigration and customs enforcement custody. 2 of those suspects also faced murder and assault charges. In the last year, but they were released. 3 more people.
That is just truly ridiculous. 2 out of these 8 people were wanted for attempted murder. And once their location of residence was front page news, ICE was able to swoop in and pick these guys up. Because shockingly, these criminals returned to the scene of the crime, and ICE found them all back inside the same apartment they had been squatting in. And this has many people asking, how bad do you have to be to get punished for anything in this city?
Now, the suspect who prompted that 911 call that set all of this off, it's this guy on your screen, Hector De Sousa Villalta. He was accused of shooting a man last year. He was charged with attempted murder, but was later released.
Why are our cops there a second time arresting people that...
You know, for all of New York City's faults, at least the police are as confused as the state of Florida is watching this right now. And the real problem underneath all of this is deeper than defund the police, remember that? Apparently it wasn't just a slogan, it's an actual way of thinking and acting. And the reason New York City has an out-of-control squatting problem and an out-of-control crime problem is because judges apparently think this way. And the judge that they were able to see is the same judge who released criminals who attacked police. Maybe they said they were sorry, but the point is, when part of the system works, another part comes along to snatch injustice from the jaws of punishment. And does this endanger the law-abiding? Absolutely. Does anyone seem to care?
And that's the question so many are asking. Now, when it comes to De Sousa Villalta's latest appearance in court, a judge let him go. Again, on supervised release. The same judge released 2 other squatters, and another judge let 3 more go on supervised.
So as you can see, it wasn't just one judge that was a problem. Every judge these people saw wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt. Every person involved got sympathetic treatment. Didn't matter that they were trespassing. Didn't matter that they were drug-dealing criminals. And the other odd thing about all of this is we're talking about illegal gun charges. Those have a mandatory minimum sentence if you're convicted. How can that person get released when the evidence that the gun is theirs is overwhelming? And the same people who tell us they want to get weapons off the streets release the people who buy those weapons back to the streets. None of this makes any sense, but it's got New Yorkers asking, what and where is the ship we're on being steered into? Nobody's gonna like the answer to that question.
The complaining by Mayor Adams is nothing short than stunning.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott seizing on the opportunity to point fingers at Mayor Eric Adams while in New York City. Adams responding to Abbott's visit to New York and said that he's welcome to stay at a migrant shelter to see what it's like.
So he can see what he has created and understand.
So if you want to know where the city's laws are taking it, it's important to understand that only 20% of the total number of asylum seekers that have come here came on a bus that was paid for by the Texas government. And that means people have 0 plans to stop traveling to New York City. Not because they're criminals, but because of the generous safety net that New York City spreads for everyone who arrives. Because even with the shelter evictions, you've still got a place to stay for 30 days if you're a single adult and 60 days if you're family. That's better than pretty much anywhere else. And even if that wasn't the case, this is still an international city. And the chances of connecting with people here who speak your language and are from where you're from, definitely better than in North Dakota, that's for sure. But the squatting crisis and asylum crisis both exist for the exact same reason. New York City's laws have allowed these 2 crises to explode without much thought of how the city finds its way out of either of them. And to prove it, just look at how the city is telling suddenly evicted people that, hey, you might have been staying here in one of our shelters for a year or more, but now you've got to go and you've got to make it on your own in a city with $5,000 monthly rents. And you can't prove you've got a job because you're not allowed to have one. But don't worry, once you become a tenant, we'll protect you so aggressively that no one will rent to you in the first place. What an absolute disaster for people who were relying on the city for pretty much everything and are now cut off.
So Judge Bowen let Hector out, no bail. Even though Hector had been arrested, shouldn't be here in the first place. So the New York Post covered it, put Hector's picture on the front page, and then ICE went in and arrested 3 of these guys.
Now, since the laws here aren't changing anytime soon, we shouldn't expect the near future to be any different than what we're witnessing today, and that's why critics say all of the problems New York is experiencing will only continue to grow. Now, New York City does have a new bill that would allow police to arrest somebody who's a squatter, but it's already up to the police to determine who's a squatter and who's not, and because the police police are afraid to arrest anybody in this town, they're probably going to continue siding with the squatters. After all, these aggressive courts could sue them or prosecute them if they evict the wrong person from an apartment. And this does nothing to stop the biggest problem landlords have had with squatters in this town for years. Because those gang members weren't in an apartment that they stole randomly. In fact, the owner had leased it to them previously and they were paying rent. No, they were legal renters at one point. They just stopped paying rent, which means they had presumably a lease with the owner's signature that gave them the right to live there. Now, I'm not advocating for mass evictions, but in a world where landlords lose their property after they lease it to someone, it becomes very hard to imagine how vulnerable people without a straightforward income and employment situation are going to provide for themselves here. And of course, this is magnified by New York City's housing crisis with a historic low vacancy of 1%. And the hardest time for anyone to get a house is when they have to compete with other people to get the same house, and the asylum population that is now being told to go and survive on their own is at a complete disadvantage here, which proves that things here are so bad and so mismanaged that multiple crises now exist at a level beyond what anybody in charge ever imagined would take place, and it's all hurting the people the city claims are its most vulnerable. What do you think the city can do to help people get housing who it's now telling to go and be homeless? What do you think the city should do about squatters? Should they punish them? Should they lock them up? Let me know. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.